So another methodology out there is one that's called the five whys, and really this one is kind of interesting to me. I've heard it described a number of different ways, and the best one I've heard is think of if you have children, think of the times when your child. Usually this happens about the time a child is 4 3 4 years old. If you don't have children, maybe you have nieces, nephews, some exposure to children at some point. When they ask you a question and you respond with the answer to the question, and then they immediately follow up with why. Why did dinosaurs go extinct? Well, the planet evolved to a point where it could no longer sustain the life of dinosaurs. Okay, well, why? Well, there's one theory that it got, the climate just got completely unbearable, and dinosaur life could no longer exist. Well, why? Well, because their food source disappeared, due to the change in climate, and then that caused the problem. Well, why? So you quickly realize how much or how little you know about a topic when you're quizzed by a 4 or 5 year old that wants to know the answers to these questions. And while it is a bit of a nuisance when it comes from a child on a trivial question that you may or may not be the expert on, and you get put in your place by a 4 or 5 year old, it's also a very effective tactic in business to really try and get to the root cause of the issues. So we've spent everything prior to this has been talking about problem solving. Now we're really trying to figure out why. Why did it happen? Okay, was it bad process? Was it bad people? Was it bad technology? Was it external factors like the environment? It could be any number of things. Okay, so that gets us to this kind of last approach that we refer to as the five whys. Okay, and for me, I'm reminded of a boss I had that anytime something would go wrong, or sometimes something would go right, he always wanted more information about it. So I had weekly meetings with the boss, and I learned early on the hard way that I would go into his office with a problem, or maybe something that had gone really well, and say, well, we had a problem last week with the blah blah blah. And he was always a very calm guy, and he would just kind of lean back in his chair and look at me and go, why is that? And I would give an answer that I thought was a very succinct and clear answer, and he would say, why? And this would go on 2 or 3 times, and the thing that he always did in between those was every time I would stop talking, he would just stop and look at me for what seemed like a very, very long time. In reality, it was maybe 15 seconds, but that just short dramatic pause kind of gets the brain thinking. So when we talk about the five whys, it's not that there's 5 steps to the methodology. It's that we typically want to ask the question of why about 5 times. Okay, so our goal here, kind of the steps are, and again, this is posted in Canvas in a text document as well, but we write down the specific problem. Okay, a lot of times when we write down that problem, it helps us to formalize it. It helps the team to focus. Okay, as I said very early on in one of the first videos, our first step is, do we all understand the problem? Okay. And you often hear this analogy when you're talking about goals. If you're setting a goal for yourself, write it down, make it public, put it in a place where you can see it all the time to help yourself be accountable. Okay? Ask why the problem happens, and then write that answer down below the problem. Okay? If the answer you gave on the first time doesn't clearly identify the root cause of the problem, okay, ask why again. Okay? And continue to repeat this until we've gotten to that root cause. Now, business problems are complex, right? You might need to ask why to several different people to get to that answer. So one example I've provided out there to you is the why. Okay, so problem statement is customers are unhappy because they're being shipped products that don't meet their specifications. Why? Because manufacturing built the product to a specification that's different from what the customer and the salesperson agreed to. Why did manufacturing do that? Because the salesperson expedites work on the shop floor by calling the head of manufacturing directly to begin the work. An error happened when the specs were communicated. Why does the salesperson call the head of manufacturing directly to start the work instead of following the procedure, the process? Okay. Because the start the work form requires the sales director's approval before it can begin and slows down the manufacturing process if the sales director is out of the office. Okay. Why does the form contain an approval from the sales director? Because the sales director needs to be continually updated on sales for discussions with the CEO. Okay. So here we are, right? We get to that last stop, right? The sales director needs to be continually updated on the sales so he or she can keep the CEO up to speed. Okay. I don't think anyone would argue that the sales director needs to be up to speed on what's going on, but do they need to be a decision point for the order to move forward? Okay. The answer is probably not. So that gets us down to our root cause. That's, of course, an oversimplified example, but that's the 5 whys. Very useful, very effective. And many times done very informally. I think back on my childhood, and my mother would do this to me when I would do something wrong. Why did you break the window? Well, because I threw the baseball. Well, why? Well, because I was playing baseball in the backyard. Well, why were you playing baseball in the backyard when I've told you to go down the street to the park? Well, because it's hot and it's a long walk. Okay. Well, there's a problem. I was lazy. Okay. So those are the 5 whys. Again, I always think of that, small child example that's grilling me over something that I probably don't know much about. And this goes back to, I have it in some of the earlier text, but Einstein had a lot of wisdom that he offered during his lifetime. And one thing that Einstein said that I try and encompass in everything I do is Einstein said, if you can't explain it to a child simply, you don't understand it yourself. So I always try and think about that when I explain things. Is could I explain this to a small child, my nephew that's 5 years old, that he was the one that drilled me about the dinosaur extinction. Could I explain this to my 4 or 5-year-old nephew in a way that makes sense to him? Okay, I would not advocate going into your boss's office and explaining something as you would to a 5-year-old, but that's kind of a good little checkpoint of, do I accurately understand this problem and the root cause? So those are the 5 whys.